What happens when Hollywood's most legendary action hero meets daytime television's most controversial panel? You won't believe what unfolds when Harrison Ford sits down with the View hosts for what was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance. The tension in that studio was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and by the end of this explosive confrontation, one of cinema's biggest stars would be walking off that set in disgust. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. That it all started when Harrison Ford arrived at the View studio yesterday morning, ostensibly there to promote his latest project. The 81-year-old actor, known for his no-nonsense attitude and preference for privacy, seemed relaxed as he settled into the guest chair. The audience was buzzing with excitement. After all, it's not every day you get to see Han Solo and Indiana Jones in person. But what nobody in that studio could have predicted was how quickly this appearance would spiral into one of the most heated confrontations in the View's history. Joy Behar, never one to shy away from controversy, wasted no time diving into territory that would make most guests uncomfortable. "Harrison, you've been in Hollywood for decades," she began with that signature smirk of hers, "and you've seen a lot of changes. What do you think about all these young actors today speaking out about politics? Don't you think celebrities should just stick to entertaining?" The question seemed innocent enough on the surface, but anyone familiar with Behar's style knew she was baiting him. Ford shifted slightly in his chair, his weathered face showing the first signs of irritation. "I think everyone has a right to their opinion, Joy. That's what makes this country great." But Behar wasn't satisfied with that diplomatic response. She leaned forward, her voice taking on that confrontational tone that regular viewers know all too well. "Come on, Harrison. You've been pretty quiet about politics throughout your career. Some might say that's privileged silence. Don't you think actors with your platform have a responsibility to speak out?" The other hosts exchanged glances. Whoopi Goldberg looked uncomfortable, sensing where this was headed. Sarah Haynes tried to interject with a lighter question about Ford's upcoming projects, but Behar bulldozed right through her attempt to redirect. "I mean, let's be honest here," Behar continued, her voice growing more aggressive. "You've made millions playing American heroes on screen. Captain America, if you will. But where's that heroism when it comes to real issues affecting real Americans?" Ford's jaw tightened visibly. Those who know him well understand that he's not someone who appreciates being cornered or lectured, especially on live television. "I've always believed actions speak louder than words, Joy. I've supported various causes throughout my career, just not always publicly." "Oh, so you're one of those quiet philanthropists," Behar shot back with air quotes, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "How convenient. You get to keep your reputation clean while staying above the fray." The audience was starting to feel the tension. What had begun as celebrity banter was clearly becoming something much more uncomfortable. Ford's publicist, sitting in the wings, was visibly concerned, whispering urgently to a producer. Alyssa Farah Griffin, sensing the mounting tension, attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Harrison, can we talk about your experience working with younger actors? You've been a mentor to so many." But Joy Behar wasn't about to let go of her attack. Wait. I'm not done here. "Harrison, you've been in this business long enough to see how it really works. You've worked with Harvey Weinstein. You've been part of the old boys club. Don't you think it's time for some accountability?" The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to sense they were witnessing something extraordinary. Ford's face had gone from irritated to genuinely angry. His hands, which had been casually resting on the chair arms, were now gripping them tightly. "I think you're way out of line, Joy," Ford said, his voice low but filled with barely contained fury. "You don't know what you're talking about, and you're making assumptions about my character and my career that are completely unfounded." But Behar, emboldened by what she perceived as a moment of television gold, pressed harder. "Am I, though? I mean, you've been silent about so many issues. The hashtag #MeToo movement, political corruption, social justice. For someone who's played so many heroes, you've been pretty absent when real heroism was needed." The other hosts were now clearly uncomfortable. Whoopi was shaking her head, obviously wanting to move on. Sarah Haynes was looking between Ford and Behar like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. Even Sunny Hostin, usually quick to pile on with controversial takes, seemed to realize this had gone too far. Ford leaned forward, his famous intensity now fully on display. You know what? Joy, you sit here every day throwing stones at people from your glass house. You want to talk about accountability? How about the accountability of journalists who ambush guests with accusations instead of asking real questions? Ambush. Behar laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. This is called journalism, Harrison. This is what real questions look like. Not the softball interviews you're used to. The tension in the studio was now palpable. Ford's face was flushed, his breathing had quickened, and it was clear to everyone present that this Hollywood legend was reaching his breaking point. The other hosts were frantically trying to signal to producers, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of this rapidly escalating confrontation. Real questions? Ford repeated, his voice rising. You call character assassination. Real questions? You call making baseless accusations about someone's integrity journalism. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. This wasn't the entertaining celebrity chat they'd expected when they'd gotten their tickets. This was something far more raw and uncomfortable. Behar, perhaps realizing she'd pushed too far, but unable to back down on live television, doubled down. I'm asking the questions that need to be asked, Harrison. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. And that's when Harrison Ford's legendary composure finally cracked completely, setting the stage for what would become one of the most explosive moments in daytime television history. You know what, Joy? Ford's voice cut through the studio like a blade, his tone now ice-cold and dangerous. I've been in this business for 50 years, and I've dealt with my share of difficult people. But you? You're something else entirely. The studio atmosphere shifted dramatically. Every person in that room could feel the electricity in the air. Ford wasn't just angry anymore. He was furious in a way that made everyone present understand why he'd been so convincing playing characters who could be genuinely intimidating. Behar, for the first time since the interview began, looked genuinely taken aback. But her ego wouldn't let her retreat. Excuse me? I'm just doing my job, Harrison. If you can't handle tough questions, Ford interrupted, his voice rising to a level that made the studio audience visibly uncomfortable. You think ambushing someone with character assassination is tough journalism? You think making baseless accusations about someone's integrity is professional? The other hosts were now in full panic mode. Whoopi Goldberg was frantically gesturing to the producers off camera, clearly wanting to cut to commercial. Sarah Haynes had her hands pressed to her chest, looking like she might have a panic attack. Even Sunny Hostin, usually ready to jump into any controversy, was sitting perfectly still, recognizing that this situation had spiraled completely out of control. But the cameras kept rolling, and Joy Behar, perhaps driven by some combination of professional pride and personal stubbornness, refused to back down. Harrison, you're being overly sensitive. These are legitimate questions about accountability. In Hollywood, accountability? Ford's laugh was bitter and harsh. You want to talk about accountability? How about the accountability of so-called journalists who destroy people's reputations based on nothing but speculation and innuendo? The audience was completely silent now, watching this legendary actor unleash decades of pent-up frustration. With the media, this wasn't the charming, slightly gruff Harrison Ford they'd expected. This was a man who had clearly reached his absolute limit. I've never claimed to be perfect, Ford continued, his voice shaking with anger. But I've spent my entire career trying to be a decent person, trying to do right by the people I work with, trying to use whatever influence I have for good. And you sit here and try to tear that down based on what? Your assumptions? Your political agenda? Behar's face was now flushed red, her composure cracking under the intensity of Ford's response. My political agenda? You're the one who's been hiding behind your movie star image while real issues. Ford exploded, standing up so quickly his chair nearly toppled backward. You think real issues are settled by ambushing people on television? You think meaningful change comes from gotcha journalism and character assassination? The studio audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row were visibly frightened by the intensity of Ford's reaction. The camera operators were getting shots they'd never expected, capturing every moment of this Hollywood legend's complete breakdown of his famous reserve. Alyssa Farah-Griffin made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Harrison, maybe we should take a step back here. This is getting a little heated. Ford whirled around to face her, his eyes blazing. Your colleague just spent the last 10 minutes trying to destroy my reputation on live television, and you think this is just a little heated? Whoopi Goldberg finally found her voice, trying to assert some control over the chaos. Harrison, we need to lower the temperature here. This isn't productive for anyone. But Ford wasn't having it. He turned back to face Joy Behar directly, pointing an accusatory finger at her. You know what's not productive, Whoopi? Letting people like her use this platform to spread lies and innuendo about decent people. You know what's not productive? Giving bullies a microphone and calling it journalism. Bullies. Behar finally found her voice again, her tone defensive and angry. I'm not a bully, Harrison. I'm asking the hard questions that need to be asked. Hard questions. Ford's voice was now loud enough that it was probably audible in the hallway. Outside the studio. You want to know what a hard question is, Joy? Here's a hard question. How do you sleep at night knowing you make a living destroying people's reputations? The other hosts were now openly panicking. Sarah Haynes was actually crying, overwhelmed by the intensity of the confrontation. Sunny Hostin was staring at the table, clearly wishing she could disappear. Even the studio audience was starting to murmur among themselves, with some people actually getting up to leave, but Ford wasn't finished. 50 years of dealing with intrusive media, of having his private life dissected, of watching colleagues get destroyed by rumor and speculation, all came pouring out in that moment. You sit here every day, he continued, his voice now hoarse with emotion, and you tear people down. You make assumptions, you spread gossip, you destroy careers based on nothing but your own prejudices and political beliefs. And you call it journalism. Behar, now clearly in over her head but too proud to admit it, made one final attempt to maintain control. Harrison, you're being completely unreasonable. These are legitimate. Ford cut her off, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that was somehow more terrifying than his shouting. There's nothing legitimate about what you do, Joy. You're a vulture feeding on other people's pain, and you've convinced yourself you're performing some kind of public service. The studio had gone completely silent except for the sound of Ford's heavy breathing and the quiet sobbing of Sarah Haynes. Even the technical crew seemed frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut the feed. Ford looked around the studio, taking in the faces of everyone present, the other hosts, the audience, the crew members. When he spoke again, his voice was steady but filled with disgust. You know what the real tragedy is here? You had a chance to have a real conversation. You could have asked me about my work, about the craft of acting, about the projects I'm passionate about. Instead, you chose to turn this into a character assassination. He turned back to Joy Behar one final time, his weathered face a mask of contempt. And you wonder why so many people in this business refuse to do interviews anymore. You wonder why celebrities don't want to engage with the media. This is why, Joy. This is exactly why. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Ford was clearly fighting to maintain whatever composure he had left, while Behar sat in stunned silence, finally realizing that her aggressive tactics had backfired spectacularly. The other hosts looked like they wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. What happened next would go down in television history as one of the most dramatic exits ever captured on live television. Ford took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to contain the rage that had been building throughout this disastrous interview. When he looked back at Joy Behar, his expression had shifted from fury to something far more dangerous, cold, calculated disgust. You know what, Joy, he said, his voice now eerily calm. I've wasted enough of my time here. I came on this show as a courtesy, to talk about my work, to connect with fans. But you've made it clear that's not what you're interested in. He began removing his microphone, his movements deliberate and final. The small action sent shockwaves through the studio. Everyone understood what was happening. Harrison Ford, one of the biggest movie stars in the world, was about to walk out on live television. Harrison, please, Whoopi Goldberg pleaded desperately. Let's just take a breath here. We can start over. Start over? Ford's laugh was bitter as he tossed his microphone onto the coffee table with a sharp clatter. There's no starting over from this, Whoopi. Your colleague just spent the last 15 minutes trying to destroy my reputation, and you all just sat there and let it happen. The studio audience was now in complete chaos. Some people were standing up, trying to get a better view. Others were covering their mouths in shock. A few were actually applauding. Whether for Ford's defense of himself or for the sheer drama of the moment was unclear. Sarah Haynes, tears still streaming down her face, made one last desperate attempt. Harrison, we're sorry if things got out of hand. Maybe we can, out of hand. Ford interrupted, his voice rising again. This wasn't some accidental escalation, Sarah. This was a deliberate ambush. Your colleague came into this interview with an agenda, and you all knew it. Joy Behar, who had been sitting in stunned silence for the past few minutes, finally found her voice. But instead of apologizing or backing down, she doubled down one final time. Harrison, you're being dramatic. This is what interviews look like when someone asks real questions instead of just promoting your movie. The effect of her words was immediate and devastating. Ford stopped moving toward the exit and turned back to face her, his expression now genuinely frightening. Real questions, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly. Throughout the silent studio, you think destroying someone's character on live television is asking real questions? He walked back toward the desk, and for a moment, everyone in the studio, hosts, audience, crew, seemed to hold their breath. Ford leaned down, bringing his face closer to Behar's, his voice low and intense. Let me tell you what real questions look like, Joy. Real questions are about craft, about experience, about the work itself. Real questions show curiosity about another person's perspective. Real questions come from a place of genuine interest, not from a desire to create controversy. For ratings, Behar tried to respond, but Ford held up a hand, cutting her off. What you did here today wasn't journalism. It was character assassination disguised as journalism. And the fact that you can't see the difference is exactly what's wrong with this business. He straightened up, looking around the studio one final time. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of 5 decades in Hollywood, of countless interviews, of years of dealing with media intrusion. I've been in this business since before some of you were born. I've seen it change, I've seen it evolve, and I've seen it deteriorate. But I've never seen anything quite like what happened here today. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every word, every gesture. This wasn't just a celebrity meltdown. This was a moment of genuine human dignity asserting itself against manufactured controversy. You had a chance to have a real conversation with someone who's been doing this work for half a century. You could have asked about the evolution of filmmaking, about working with different directors, about the challenges of staying relevant in a changing industry. Instead, you chose to turn this into a hit piece. Ford's voice grew stronger, more passionate. And you know what's really sad? There are millions of people watching this who deserve better. They deserve real conversations, real insights, real content. Instead, they get this manufactured drama. He looked directly at Joy Behar one final time. I hope this was worth it. Joy, I hope the ratings boost you'll get from this train wreck was worth destroying whatever credibility you had left. Behar's face was now completely red, her composure entirely shattered. You can't talk to me like that, she managed to stammer. You can't come on my show and your show? Ford's interruption was sharp and final. This isn't your show, Joy. This is supposed to be a platform for meaningful conversation. But you've turned it into a circus, and I refuse to be part of it. With that, Harrison Ford turned and walked toward the studio exit. But he wasn't finished. About halfway to the door, he stopped and turned back to face the cameras directly. To everyone watching at home, he said, his voice now calm but carrying immense authority. This is what passes for journalism in some circles today. This is what happens when ego and agenda matter more than truth and respect. He paused, letting his words sink in. The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I've had the privilege of working with some of the most talented people in the entertainment industry. I've had the honor of bringing characters to life that have meant something to people. But I will not sit here and let someone attack my character and my integrity for the sake of ratings. With that final statement, Harrison Ford walked out of the View studio, leaving behind a panel of hosts in complete disarray and an audience that had just witnessed television history. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing the stunned faces of the remaining hosts. Joy Behar sat frozen, staring at the empty chair where Ford had been sitting. Whoopi Goldberg was shaking her head in disbelief. Sarah Haynes was still crying. Sunny Hostin looked like she wished she could disappear entirely. Finally, Whoopi managed to find her voice. We'll be right back, she said weakly, and the show cut to commercial, but the damage was done. In less than 30 minutes, what should have been a standard promotional interview had become one of the most explosive confrontations in daytime television history. Harrison Ford had walked out, but in doing so, he had delivered a masterclass in dignity, self-respect, and the courage to stand up against manufactured controversy. The video would go viral within hours, with millions of people praising Ford for his principled stand against what many saw as the worst tendencies in modern media. Behar's aggressive tactics had backfired spectacularly, and The View would be dealing with the fallout for months to come. This was the moment when one of Hollywood's greatest legends proved that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in someone else's circus. Harrison Ford had entered that studio as a guest, but he left as something far more significant, a symbol of dignity in an industry that too often rewards the opposite.